Alright, buckle up, philosophy adventurers. We're about to embark on a time-traveling expedition to the 18th century, a period known as the Enlightenment. Picture this Europe, powdered wigs, a whole lot of revolutionary ideas brewing, and a growing distaste for unquestioned authority. Instead of blindly following tradition or bowing to kings, people are starting to think, hey, maybe we can figure things out for ourselves. This, my friends, is the rise of what we brainy types call intellectual autonomy. Basically, thinking for yourself, and it's going to lead us to an epic showdown between two intellectual giants of the Scottish Enlightenment, David Hume and Thomas Reid. Let's zero in on our main man for today, David Hume. This guy was like the Sherlock Holmes of philosophy, living and working in Edinburgh, Scotland. Imagine a brilliant mind, tirelessly piecing together a worldview that didn't need to invoke the supernatural to explain, well, anything. He tackled everything from ethics to metaphysics, but he had to tiptoe around his rather spicy critiques of religion. You see, 18th century Scotland wasn't exactly a haven for religious skeptics, but trust me, the guy had some serious doubts, and those doubts led him to write a bombshell of an essay on, you guessed it, miracles. Now, Hume wasn't just interested in debunking miracles for kicks. He was fascinated by the very idea of testimony, how we believe things based on what other people tell us. Think about it. How much of what you know comes from someone else's say-so? Have you ever been to that exotic city your friend raves about, or is your knowledge based purely on their enthusiastic accounts, Instagram photos, and maybe a quick Google search? Hume argues that testimony is absolutely fundamental to how we navigate the world. We rely on it constantly, whether it's a news report, a history book, or your grandma's story about walking Uffle both ways to school. But here's the kicker. Hume, being the sharp cookie he was, believed that a wise person doesn't just swallow everything they hear hook, line, and sinker. He championed a principle called evidentialism, which is a fancy way of saying that you should adjust your belief based on the strength of the evidence. Makes sense, right? If your friend tells you they saw a cat wearing a tiny hat, you might raise an eyebrow. But if they tell you they saw a cat sleeping in a sunbeam, you'd probably nod along. So, how does this relate to miracles? Well, Hume defined a miracle as something that breaks the laws of nature, a hold-up that's never happened before kind of event. Think someone rising from the dead. That's definitely not your everyday occurrence. Now, using his trusty principle of evidentialism, Hume throws down the gauntlet. You should never believe a miracle has happened just because someone says it did. Why? Because it's always more likely that the person telling the story is mistaken, lying, or pulling your leg than that the laws of nature have been completely overturned. Imagine this: you walk into a cafe, desperate for your caffeine fix, and the waiter says, "Sorry, no coffee today. Aliens raided the place last night and stole it all." Would you believe them? Probably not. You'd likely assume the waiter was joking, had a wild imagination, or maybe just didn't want to admit they forgot to order more beans. The possibility of an alien coffee haste is just too far-fetched. Hume's point is that believing in a miracle based on testimony is like believing the alien coffee story. We have mountains of evidence that people make mistakes, exaggerate, or even lie. We have zero evidence of people defying the laws of nature. So, when someone tells you they witnessed a miracle, the smart money is on human fallibility, not supernatural intervention. It's a bold claim, and it certainly ruffled some feathers back in Hume's day, and still does today. But it forces us to confront some fundamental questions. How do we decide what to believe? How much weight should we give to the stories other people tell us? And can we truly be intellectually autonomous if we're constantly relying on the testimony of others? These are the kinds of juicy questions that make philosophy such a fascinating and mind-bending adventure. So, are you ready to join the debate? Okay, let's dive back into the 18th century, a time of powdered wigs, lively philosophical debates, and a Scottish minister named Thomas Reid, who was about to throw a rather large, common sense-shaped wrench into David Hume's skeptical machine. We touched on Hume last time, remember? He's the guy who essentially said miracles, on the basis of what people say, "Nah, I'm not buying it," but he's like the ultimate skeptic. The guy at the party who questions everything, even the existence of the party itself, probably while adjusting his spectacles and muttering about empirical evidence. Now, there are plenty of ways to try and poke holes in Hume's argument. You could nitpick his definition of a miracle, for instance, arguing that he's got the whole concept wrong. But Reid, a man of the cloth and a professor at not one, but two prestigious Scottish universities, Aberdeen and Glasgow, mind you, the man was clearly no slouch in the brains department, found a much more intriguing, a much more fundamental way to challenge Hume's skepticism. He laid it all out in a book with the rather hefty title, An Inquiry into the Human Mind on the Principles of Common Sense, first published in 1764, and guaranteed to impress anyone you casually leave it lying around your coffee table. He directly challenged the assumption that you should only trust testimony when you have evidence the person is likely to be right. Imagine this: you're strolling down the street, minding your own business, and suddenly you see a cat wearing a tiny, perfectly tailored top hat, perhaps even smoking a miniature pipe. You believe it, right? I mean, you saw it with your own two eyes. You wouldn't demand double-blind studies on feline fashion before accepting it as reality. Reed's big, revolutionary idea was that believing what someone tells you is, in a fundamental way, just like believing what you see. It's all about trust, this innate human capacity to accept information from the world around us. But here's where it gets really juicy, where the philosophical plot thickens. Do we only trust our senses when we have rock-solid, unimpeachable evidence that they're reliable? Interestingly enough, Hume and Reed, despite being philosophical rivals locked in a battle of wits across the ages, agreed on one crucial point. We don't actually have any truly good evidence that our senses are always right. Our eyes can play tricks on us, after all. Think about optical illusions, those mind-bending images that make us question reality, or mirages shimmering in the desert, promising water where there is only sand. Or that time you were absolutely certain you saw a ghost lurking in the shadows, but it turned out to be just your laundry haphazardly draped over a chair. We've all been there. So, if we don't trust our senses based on irrefutable evidence, why, Reed cleverly wondered, should we only trust testimony based on it? Why the double standard? Now, both Hume and Reid were deeply interested in this idea that humans are, in a sense, hardwired to think in certain ways. They believed in innate principles, these fundamental rules etched into our very being, that govern our thoughts and feelings, like the source code of the human mind. For example, they both agreed that we're hardwired to trust our senses. We just naturally, instinctively believe what we see. It's how we navigate the world. But Reid, that sly philosophical fox, took it a step further, pushing the boundaries of the accepted wisdom. He argued that we're also hardwired to trust what other people tell us. He called this the principle of credulity, a fancy, academic way of saying we're naturally inclined to believe others. It's like we have a built-in trustometer, a little gauge in our brains that's constantly assessing the reliability of information. He even suggested that this principle is particularly strong in children, who tend to believe almost everything they're told with wide-eyed wonder. So, what does this all mean for Hume's argument against miracles and the reliability of testimony? Well, if Reid is right, and we're naturally, innately inclined to trust both with our senses and the words of others, then maybe, just maybe, Hume's skepticism needs a little recalibration, a bit of fine-tuning. Perhaps that internal trustometer is pointing in a slightly different direction than Hume assumed. Maybe, just maybe, we're not quite as skeptical as he thought. It's a fascinating philosophical puzzle, a debate that continues to echo through the halls of academia and spark lively discussions even today. What do you think? Are we naturally trusting creatures, predisposed to believe, or are we all, deep down, a little bit like Hume, questioning everything, even the very nature of reality itself? And what about that cat in the hat? Is he real, or just a figment of our collective imagination? A testament to the power of both testimony and our own, perhaps overly trusting minds. The questions like the debate go on. All right, let's dive into the fascinating world of trust and truth, where two philosophical heavyweights, David Hume and Thomas Reid, duked it out over a question that's surprisingly relevant to our everyday lives. Should we believe what other people tell us? Sounds simple, right? Well, buckle up, because it gets delightfully messy. Like a philosophical food fight with ideas instead of mashed potatoes. Imagine two completely different operating systems for the human mind. On one side, we have Reid, who paints a picture of us as being born with a built-in trust app. Like baby birds instinctively opening their beaks for food, Reid believed we're hardwired to accept what others say. It's in our nature, a gift, as he dramatically puts it. He uses children as his star witnesses, saying, "These little humans are the ultimate believers. They'll swallow any story you spin, no questions asked." Think about a child being told about Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. They believe without a shred of doubt. And in Reid's view, there's nothing wrong with that. It is completely natural. According to him, if we followed Hume's more skeptical approach, no proposition that is uttered in discourse would be believed, and such distrust and incredulity would deprive us of the greatest benefits of society and place us in a worse condition than that of the savages. Now, picture Hume, rake detective, the skeptic, perfectly arched eyebrow. He counters, "Hold on a minute. Trust is earned, not given away like free candy." For Hume, believing someone without evidence is like buying a used car without checking the engine, a recipe for disaster. Or to use a more modern analogy, it's like clicking on a suspicious link without checking the URL. You're just asking for trouble. He argued that we need to gather evidence about a person's reliability before we can accept their testimony. It's like checking someone's references before hiring them or reading reviews before buying something online. We do these things all the time in our daily lives, often without even thinking about it. So, who's right? Reid points to the trusting nature of children as proof of our innate credulity. He poses a thought experiment. If trust were based on experience, wouldn't kids with their limited life experience be the least trusting? But they're not. They're the most trusting of all. They haven't been jaded by the world yet. Adults, on the other hand, have been burned a few times. Maybe they've been lied to by a scam, or fallen for a scam, and become more cautious, more discerning. This, Reid argues, is the opposite of what Hume's model would predict. Reid's conclusion: our trust isn't learned, it's a fundamental part of our human software, like our operating system's default setting. But here's where things get juicy, like a philosophical lemon squeezed into the mix. Reid isn't just talking about what children do at trust blindly, he's also suggesting what they should do. He believed that it's counterintuitive to condemn children's trusting nature. If we were all as suspicious as Hume suggests, society would crumble. We'd be isolated, unable to benefit from shared knowledge, and worse off than savages. It's a bit harsh, but you get the idea. He's painting a picture of a dystopian world without trust. Imagine a world where you couldn't trust your doctor, your teacher, or even your friends. It would be a lonely and chaotic place. In other words, without trust, according to Reid, we cannot have a functional society. But Reid doesn't stop at trust. He also claims we're naturally honest. He calls it the principle of veracity, arguing that lying is like going against our very nature. Think of it as an internal truth compass that's always pointing north, or a built-in lie detector that's constantly buzzing when we're tempted to fib. According to Reid, telling the truth is natural as breathing, while lying is like holding your breath. It's possible, but it's uncomfortable and ultimately unsustainable. Hume, never one to shy away from a challenge, throws a wrench into this rosy picture. He's like the party pooper who points out the flaws in your perfect plan. He says, "Let's be real, people lie all the time." And he's got a point, doesn't he? He then serves up a buffet of examples, like a platter of uncomfortable truths. 1. Self-interest politicians spinning tales to get elected. Classic case of a motive to deceive. They will often start imposture among an ignorant people, he says. Think about campaign promises that are conveniently forgotten after the election, or political ads that stretch the truth to make the opponent look bad. We see this kind of thing play out in the news every day, and it can make us cynical about the whole political process. 2. The thrill of the extraordinary. We're drawn to sensational stories, even if they sound a bit out there. Remember those fantastical tales from faraway lands in Hume's time? People ate them up, even though many were completely fabricated. We might not be talking about travelers' tales so much in the present day, but you can think of the same principle when we encounter clickbait headlines on social media or urban legends that get passed around as if they were true. Man fights off alligator with a garden gnome. Who wouldn't click on that? We love a good story even if it's a bit far-fetched. 3. The joy of gossip. We love being the first to share juicy news, even if we haven't exactly fact-checked it. It's like a mental sugar rush, and it fuels the spread of rumors like wildfire. Think about how quickly gossip spreads in a school or workplace. Often with little regard for the truth. It's like a game of telephone where the original message gets distorted beyond recognition by the time it reaches the end of the line. We enjoy telling other people news, even when we don't have very good evidence for it. So, where does this leave us? With two very different visions of human nature, like two different lenses through which to view the world. Reid sees us as fundamentally trusting and honest, with testimony as a natural and essential source of knowledge. It's an optimistic view, one that emphasizes the importance of social connection and shared understanding. Hume, on the other hand, sees a more complicated picture, where testimony is often unreliable, and we're left to navigate a world of potential deception, relying on our own judgment to sort fact from fiction. It's a more cautious, skeptical view, one that highlights the need for critical thinking and evidence-based reasoning. It's a debate that continues to resonate today, perhaps even more so in our post-truth era, where misinformation and fake news proliferate online. Do we approach the world with open hearts and minds, or with a healthy dose of skepticism? Is trust a default setting, or something that must be meticulously built, like a carefully constructed bridge? And how do we balance the benefits of believing others with the risks of being misled, especially in a world where anyone can publish anything online, regardless of its veracity? How do we teach our kids to be discerning and to distinguish between reliable sources of information and unreliable ones? These are the questions that Hume and Reid grappled with, and they're questions that remain as relevant and thought-provoking as ever. They are questions that we, as individuals and as a society, must continue to grapple with as we navigate the complexities of the information age. What do you think? How do you decide who and what to trust? All right, let's dig even deeper into this intellectual tug of war between autonomy and solidarity and explore why these ideas from centuries ago still resonate with us today. It's a bit like a philosophical soap opera with twists, turns, and plenty of drama. So, we've got the Enlightenment, this period in history where everything's being questioned. It's like humanity collectively hit puberty and started challenging authority figures left and right. And leading the charge, we have Immanuel Kant, this German philosopher with a penchant for long sentences and big ideas. In 1784, he drops his essay on answering the question, "What is enlightenment?" And let's be honest, the title alone is enough to make you feel a little smarter just for reading it. Kant's answer is basically a call to grow up, intellectually speaking. Enlightenment, he says, is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity. He even throws in the Latin phrase, sapere aude, dare to be wise, which sounds incredibly cool and rebellious, like something you'd see spray painted on a university wall. Kant's essentially saying, stop being a sheep. Stop letting other people, especially the powers that be, tell you what to think. Use your own darn brain. But what does it mean to use your own brain? This is where things get interesting. Kant introduces the concept of intellectual autonomy. Now, imagine that one friend you have who always has a different opinion, the one who marches to the beat of their own drum. They might love a movie everyone else hates, or hate a book everyone else loves. They're not afraid to disagree, even if it means standing alone. That, in a nutshell, is intellectual autonomy. It's about forming your own beliefs, even if they're unpopular, even if everyone around you thinks you're crazy. Now, picture this: you're at a party and everyone's raving about this new, incredibly popular belief. But you, based on your own reasoning, your own research, have come to a completely different conclusion. You know that if you voice your opinion, you might be ridiculed, ostracized, or even canceled. Do you have the courage to speak up? That's the kind of situation that tests your intellectual autonomy. Would Kant think you're enlightened for doing so? It's not just about being different for the sake of it. It's about genuinely believing something based on your own understanding, regardless of social pressure. It's brave. But is it always good? Enter David Hume, the skeptical Scotsman. Hume was like the ultimate fact-checker of his time. He wasn't against trusting others. He recognized that we rely on other people's knowledge all the time. I mean, imagine trying to bake a cake without a recipe, or learn about ancient Rome without reading any history books. You'd be lost. But Hume's big thing was that you shouldn't trust blindly. You need evidence. You need to make sure the person you're trusting is actually reliable. It's like being a detective, always questioning, always looking for proof. It's okay to trust your mechanic to fix your car, but you probably wouldn't trust them to perform open-heart surgery, right? You need evidence of their expertise in a particular area. But then, plot twist. Here comes Thomas Reid, who basically said, hold on a minute, guys, you're missing the whole point. Reid thought that humans are inherently social creatures, and that includes our intellectual lives. For him, relying on others for knowledge wasn't a weakness. It was natural and even virtuous. He'd argue that our beliefs are not supposed to be formed in isolation, but within a community. He championed something called intellectual solidarity, which is like saying, we're all in this together, folks. Let's share information, learn from each other, and build a collective understanding of the world. It's like a big philosophical group hug. Think about it: if you're trying to learn a new skill, like playing the guitar, wouldn't you seek out a teacher or watch tutorials made by experienced players? Reid would say that's perfectly fine, even desirable. We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time we want to learn something new. We can, and should, benefit from the knowledge and experience of others. He argued that this isn't immaturity, it's just smart. So, we have these two very different perspectives. On one hand, the Enlightenment ideal of intellectual autonomy, encouraging us to be independent thinkers, to question everything, and to forge our own paths. On the other, Reid's emphasis on intellectual solidarity, reminding us that we're social beings who learn and grow through connection and collaboration. And here's the kicker, these debates from centuries ago are still relevant today. Think about the information overload we face in the digital age. How do we decide who to trust? How do we navigate a world full of fake news, misinformation, and echo chambers? Are we better off being fiercely independent thinkers, questioning everything we see and hear? Or should we rely more on trusted sources and communities to guide us? The tension between intellectual autonomy and intellectual solidarity is something we grapple with every day, whether we realize it or not. It's about finding the right balance between thinking for ourselves and learning from others. It's about being open to new ideas while also being discerning about the information we consume. It's a complex and ongoing process, and there are no easy answers. But hey, isn't that what makes philosophy so fascinating? It challenges us to think critically about the world around us and our place in it. And maybe, just maybe, engaging with these big ideas is a step towards becoming a little more enlightened ourselves. After all, as Kant might say, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single, sapere ard. Have you ever had that nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, you don't really know something you think you know? Like you can repeat the facts, you can pass the test, but deep down, there's a little voice whispering, do I actually get this? That, my friends, is where our philosophical journey begins. We're going to unpack a classic intellectual showdown, a clash of the titans, if you will, between two very different ways of thinking about knowledge. On one side, we have Team Intellectual Independence, the champions of thinking for yourself. They're like the rebels of the philosophy world, the ones who aren't afraid to question authority and challenge the status quo. Leading this team, we have the philosophical heavyweights David Hume and Immanuel Kant. Picture them as the brainy superheroes of independent thought, urging us to break free from the chains of received wisdom. On the other side, we have Team Intellectual Solidarity, the defenders of tradition, community, and trusting the wisdom of others. Their star player is Thomas Reid, a philosopher who believed that trusting others is not only okay, it's essential for a functioning society. Think of them as the guardians of shared knowledge, the ones who believe that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Now, Kant, with his characteristic flair for the dramatic, had this Latin motto he was super fond of, sapere ode. It's got that ancient wisdom vibe, doesn't it? It translates to, dare to be wise. But let's be honest, dare to know sounds way cooler, like a challenge, a call to intellectual arms. What Kant is really getting at here is a radical idea. If all your beliefs are just based on what other people tell you, are you truly thinking for yourself? Are you genuinely knowing, or are you just a human echo chamber, mindlessly repeating what you've heard? It's a bit like being a detective. Sure, you can read the reports of other officers, but until you've examined the evidence yourself, interviewed the witnesses firsthand, and pieced together the clues, can you truly say you know what happened? Kant would argue that you can't. He's saying that hand-me-down knowledge isn't the real deal. Of course, this raises some eyebrows. You might be thinking, wait a minute. I learn things from other people all the time. If my friend, a seasoned traveler, tells me about this amazing hidden gem of a restaurant in Rome, and I go there and love it, didn't I know it was a good restaurant based on her testimony? And you'd have a point. We rely on the experiences and knowledge of others constantly. It's how we navigate the world. But here's where things get interesting. Some philosophers, going all the way back to the ancient Greek bigwig Plato, argue that genuine, deep down, soul-satisfying knowledge requires something more than just believing what you're told. It requires understanding. It's about being able to explain why something is true, to connect it to a larger framework of knowledge, to really own that knowledge. Let's bring back our star ferry example. Imagine one person has only ever read about it on Wikipedia. They can tell you its history, its route, maybe even the price of a ticket. But then you have someone who has lived in Hong Kong their entire life. They've ridden the star ferry countless times, felt the sea breeze on their face, heard the clang of the bell, seen the city skyline reflected in the water. Who truly knows the star ferry? The Wikipedia reader has information, but the lifelong resident has experience, a visceral, lived understanding that goes far beyond mere facts. They can tell stories, evoke emotions, paint a picture with words that the Wikipedia reader simply can't. That, my friends, is the difference between superficial knowledge and the real, deep, meaningful kind. So, if we're chasing that deeper level of understanding, that wisdom that can't be simply downloaded from the internet or absorbed from a textbook, then intellectual autonomy becomes incredibly important. It's the only way to truly get it, to make knowledge your own, to become, as Kant might say, knower. But, and this is a big but, there's another side to this story. What happens when everyone is encouraged to question everything and everyone? Where does that leave us as a society? This is where the social and political implications start to get really juicy. You see, our natural tendency to trust what others tell us, especially those we're close to, has a built-in conservative element. We tend to inherit beliefs, values, and traditions from our families, our communities, the generations that came before us. Think about how religious beliefs, political ideologies, and moral codes often get passed down like family heirlooms. Is this a good thing, a bad thing, a necessary evil? That's where the debate gets heated. Reed, our champion of intellectual solidarity, would likely argue that this tendency is not just natural, but essential. It's what binds communities together, preserves valuable traditions, and provides a sense of continuity and stability. He might say that a society where everyone is constantly questioning everything is a society on the verge of chaos. Hume and Kant, our independent thinkers, would probably be more skeptical. They might see this inheritance of beliefs as a recipe for stagnation, a way to keep outdated ideas on life support long after they've outlived their usefulness. They might argue that progress, innovation, and social change require us to be willing to challenge the status quo, to break free from the shackles of tradition, even if it means questioning the beliefs of our parents, our teachers, and our leaders. So, who's right? Well, my friend, that's the beauty of philosophy. There are no easy answers. It really comes down to your own values, your own perspective on the world. Do you cherish the wisdom of the past, the comfort of shared beliefs, the stability of tradition? Or do you find yourself drawn to the thrill of new ideas, the challenge of questioning everything, the possibility of forging a new path, even if it means rocking the boat? These are the fundamental questions we'll be grappling with. It's a journey of intellectual exploration, a chance to examine our own assumptions about knowledge, truth, and the very nature of understanding. There will be twists and turns, moments of clarity, and moments of confusion. But through it all, we'll be sharpening our minds, expanding our perspectives, and maybe, just maybe, getting a little closer to that elusive thing called wisdom. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get this philosophical party started.